Darnell Walker, thanks for joining me here on the podcast, man. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me. I'm honored, man. I'm truly honored.
Well, listen, I am too. I'm so grateful that we connected. I'm grateful that you wrote this beautiful book. Congratulations, as this episode is dropping, your brand new book, Never Can Say Goodbye, is just out today. So,
Yeah,
how are,
right on.
how are you feeling having this beautiful book out in the world?
Yeah, it's too surreal. It's hard to even explain, but I'm so honored. I'm so excited about it. Mostly to see what conversations happen from it.
Yeah.
That's where my excitement is. Overwhelmed also, but that's the smaller part. And
Yeah.
so dealing with all the emotions, but I'm loving it and excited to see where this thing goes.
Yeah, well, I just finished reading the book and I'm still processing a lot of what I read and it deeply impacted me. And I'm somebody, Darnell, is, are just meeting each other for the first time. And I emailed you a little bit about this. And I've talked about this here on the show as people who listen to and watch the show know. I mean, I've had quite a bit of experience with death and loss in my own life,
Yeah.
and consider myself someone who's not afraid to talk about it, think about it, engage. And I did notice though, as I was reading the book, like a lot of stuff came up, and there were some places where I realized, like, oh, I don't think about that, or I don't talk about that, or I don't really go there. Um, so I appreciate what you've written and what you do. It's really important. And I'm just curious for people listening and watching who don't know what a death doula is. Maybe we can start with that. Like, how would you describe what a death doula is?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great place to start. It's someone who at the end of someone's life is there to help them transition. I always say that's the general definition. But as a death doula and as someone who works with a lot of death doulas and a lot of, now being in that community, we all do something different. Like we all do very unique things. Like for me, I'm a writer. I love writing. I love helping people tell their story. And so what I do as a death doula is come in, help you transition, help you get to the end of your life with and or get as close to the end of life that you want as possible, but also to help you tell the story that you want to leave behind, that legacy, that those things you want to leave behind for your folks, whatever that is. And so that's what I do, and also advocate for people in the medical system, help plan funerals, help do all those things. But overall, it's helping you get as close to that ending you want as possible.
Yeah, well, it's really a beautiful thing, and it's, you know, important, I imagine, challenging work. You talk very openly about it in the book, and I'm curious. I mean, you open the book, talking about your grandmother and how
Mhm.
she inspired you, and I'm just curious, like this journey for you to, become a death doula. Um, tell me a little bit about sort of how that started and some of your journey to it.
Yeah, no, I love talking about my grandmother. Her name was Irene Elizabeth Jones. But yeah, growing up, I was always with her. Any opportunity I got to be by her side. And she wasn't someone who called herself a death doula. She was just this person who loved family, loved friends, loved being there for people. It was just who she was naturally. And so that's what I was able to witness coming up. And because I was always with her, and I came from a family that didn't really want to talk about death except her. She loved talking about it. And since I was a kid, she'd tell me, this is what I want. If this ever happened to me, this is my threshold. This is what I could not stand. And I think I'll leave if this happens. So, all that. And so I came up in that and helped her, go take care of family, go take care of friends. She made food for people in the community when they were, and it wasn't just death loss, it was, any kind of grief they were dealing with,
Mm.
relationships. She had a neighbor who was dealing with a lot, and I watched her like really love this person. And so for her and for me growing up, it wasn't a thing of we are here to help people at the end of their life. This is just what love looks like.
Mm.
And it wasn't until about 11 years ago now, almost 11 years ago now, that I was talking to a friend who works in hospice, and she says, "Oh, I'm telling her all these experiences that I had with my grandmother, and I was my grandmother's doula, not knowing that I was a doula at the time, of course, and
Right.
my grandfather and more people too." And I'm telling a friend of mine these experiences, and she says, "Oh, it sounds like you're a death doula." And I immediately look and say, I look it up and I'm like, I've never heard of this before, but this is exactly what I've been doing for the last, since I was 9, and literally since I was 9. And it was the wildest thing. Suddenly, and like I said, I'm a writer and I'm good at writing. And my entire life, that's felt like the purpose. And not to get into that whole thing, but suddenly it felt like death was the thing I'm supposed to do,
Mm.
and writing was the thing that I'm good at and I should do and continue to do. But death was like, oh, this is what I need to do.
Yeah.
And it stuck. And I've with intention, I've been doing it for the last 11 years now. And but really since I was 9 years old.
That's beautiful. And well, look, you write beautifully, and the stories in the book are so poignant. And there's, and for everybody listening, watching, I mean, I hope you'll get the book and read the book because it's so powerful. But I love the way that you weave in all these different stories and the lessons that you learned and that we can all learn from some of these experiences. And one of the things, I mean, you talk about this quite a bit in the book, and I have felt this myself for a long time. Why do you think we have, and you've seen it from so many different cultures and backgrounds and places in the world, but why do you think we have such a hard time talking about or facing death?
Yeah, I've seen it. I have seen it in so many places, and I've seen where for some people it's one thing and for some people it's another. I know for a lot of folks that I know, it's because they haven't fully experienced the life that they wanted. And so death means that, you know, if I talk about it, it makes death a reality.
Right.
And if that comes sooner than I want it to, then I don't get to live that life. I didn't get to live that life I want. And so it's scary. It's scary to think about not being fulfilled or living that fulfilled life. For some, it's that fear of the unknown. It's that unknown. It's that one thing we can't control. When we want control over so much, we want to know what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, how is it going to happen, and we don't get that. We
Right.
don't know any of that, and so it's a real feel. I close family friends. I talk in the book about my dad. My dad refuses to talk about death, and for him it's a thing that just brings up emotions, and he doesn't want to have to sometimes deal with those emotions that death brings.
Yeah.
I don't want to cry right now. I don't want to think about my mom. Like it was his mom who showed me the way, and
Yeah.
so even talking to him, I have to sneak in. I have to be sly when it comes to talking about that. And I found ways to kind of approach the subject and we're in there for about a minute before he realizes what happened. And then he's like, nope, nope, I'm not doing this right now.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, good. I got a minute out of you though. But yeah, we've run from it, man. We've run from it so much. And I don't want us to anymore. I want us to say, uh, I embrace that this is going to happen. Of course, we can't control it, but if we plan for it, if we think about it, and if we know that it's coming, we can live better lives. We can plan. We can, there was that study done. I can't quote it all the way right now, but it's like if you think about your death, I think 5 times a day, you live a better life.
Really?
Yeah, it's this incredible thing. And someone created an app for it where they send you 5 notifications a day with like a quote or a reminder. Don't forget, you're gonna die.
Good.
And I do this for people, right? Like I do this. I
Yeah.
send people like, hey, listen, don't forget, death is coming,
Yeah.
but not today. And because it's not coming today, you still have time to do that thing you wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes wonder, my own experience, like when my dad died, I remember Darnell, I was in the room with him, and it was the first time that I had ever been in the room. I was 27 years old, and my dad and I had a really complicated relationship.
Yeah.
We had made quite a bit of peace at that point. Um, but I was in the room in the hospital, and he had had some health problems. He had been mentally ill for much of his life, and he and my mom split up when I was 3, and there just had been a lot of pain around the relationship. But the interesting experience that I had with that, and I'm sure you've had this experience so many times, but at the final moment when he took his last breath, and I was there with my half sister Rachel, there was such a, I mean, there was tubes and machines and all the things, and it wasn't peaceful, and
Yeah.
it, but there was such a moment of grace and peace, and it felt so intimate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a few years later, my wife Michelle and I had our first daughter, Samantha, who's now almost 20. And I remember when Samantha was born, and I'd never been in the room when a baby was born. So I'm
Mhm.
having this experience, and my wife is, giving birth to our daughter, and there's all these emotions. And I remember at that moment, though, Darnell, I had this weird, eerie feeling like this feels familiar. What is it? And it wasn't until about 36 hours later when I was journaling, I was like, that was the same presence in the room when
Mhm.
Samantha was born as when my dad died.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. It was
That's a
sacred.
beautiful moment. Yeah, that's a beautiful moment, man. And thank you for sharing that. It is, everyone I know who's been there for so, and I'd say at least every 2 weeks, I get a message from someone saying, I was in the room when, someone died, a family member. And they say, I was so afraid, but it was one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever had, and I'm so glad I did that. I'm so grateful that I could be there for that person. And it is that. You feel it, and it's something that stays with you. And if we're lucky, we get that again.
Yeah.
When when your daughter's born, or when my son was born, I get it. And my son was born before my grandma died, and I remember so it worked the opposite way for me, and I remember being there, and I was the last one there when my grandmother was dying,
Mm.
and I had to give her permission to go because sometimes people need permission to go,
Yeah.
and it was that same like loving feeling of like welcoming someone in, but also ushering someone up. And it
Yeah.
was like, this is what love is, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that story, when you share in the book about that, it was so moving to me, and your connection with her and her connection with you and all the things that she taught you. And there was a phrase you used a couple times in the book that I wrote down that I'd never heard that I really love, is this notion of being blessed to have a deathbed. So
Yes.
can you
Yeah.
say a little more about that? Because I had some
Oh
thoughts,
man.
but I'd love to hear what you
Yeah,
think.
and people who are listening to this are like, what? No, because and it's one of the questions I lead in with when I
Mhm.
talk to people is, how do you want to die?
Yeah.
And so more people than not say, I want it to be instant or I want it to be while I'm sleeping.
Mm.
Me, I want the deathbed. I want the experience of that. I want to be surrounded by the people I love. I have a plan, and I think we're lucky if we get that. We get to see it's this moment where finally everything makes sense. We
Hmm.
get to integrate like everything from our life that, when we were 20, we did this thing that didn't make sense at the time. 2 months ago, this thing that didn't make sense, and suddenly you're here, and it's like, oh, that's what that is. It's that integration, and that's what the deathbed affords us. Everyone that I've sat with that had one, that had a deathbed, um, they were so glad that they had it because they were able to close out things. They were able to fix relationships. Um, they were able to leave people with things that would help them heal. You know, and just having conversations. I sat with a friend. I was my friend's death doula. Now it's been a little over a year, and I
Mm.
remember being there for him. And he was only 39 and a musician, a great musician. And I asked, I said, did you do everything you wanted to do in this life? And he's like, no, I spent most of my life working to be able to afford a great life for my grandmother because I wanted her to have all these things. He's like, but at the end of her life, she told me that she didn't want any of that. She just wanted me to be happy.
Mm.
Here I am now on my deathbed, and I didn't get to live for me. But he says, but I have nephews, and if you could share this message with them, to avoid that. And I want
Yeah.
them to make sure that they live that life. And it's like, yeah, so now this message can get passed down because you had the time to share that with me and to share that with his husband and with the friends who were in the room, to say, share this message. And we get that when we get the time, you
Yeah.
know. So I think that's the blessing in that. Um, and it's hard sometimes, like everyone doesn't get that. You talked about your dad. They're the tubes and all the wires, and it doesn't look peaceful a lot of
Mm.
times. Um, and that's the hard part. But sometimes it's not that.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think we have to think about, we often talk about how do we want to die, and I think we have to talk about like what the threshold is. It's like, well, at what point do I bow out? At what
Yeah.
point do I want to get out of this? And I update. I have a son. He's 21, and me and my mom, we talk about death all the time, and my dad, and I'm like my stepdad, and I'm like, yeah, listen, if I get to the point of this, then do let me go, let me go. But here are my thresholds. Here are the things I will not stand for, and
Yeah.
here's what I can take. But yeah, I think we're blessed in that way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, one of the biggest things I took away, Darnell, from your book, there were so many stories in it that touched me and moved me. And I found myself moved to tears several times. And there was a story you share about a couple in their 40s who called you and said that they wanted to prepare and plan.
Mhm.
They weren't sick. There was no diagnosis. It was like, we just want to, talk through all of these things because they had had people in their lives who had died
Mhm.
without any preparation. And it made me think, so my wife, Michelle, and I've been together for 25 years. We've gone through the loss of her mom, both of my parents, my sister, and we've done the things, the practical things like the will and the trust and the all those. But when I was reading that, I realized I don't know that we've talked all that specifically. I mean, we've talked about cremation versus burial,
Mhm.
but what do we want it to look like and what's important, or what would the funeral, and you talked about writing your own obituary. And as I was reading
Yeah.
all of that, I was both inspired and I kind of had to put the book down for a second because I was like, oh shit, like that's
Yeah.
intense. And then I noticed that my what was coming up for me, the fears that were coming up for me is like, I don't want to think about it too much in some weird superstitious way. And you said this at some other point in the book that made me
Yeah.
feel better. It's like, I'm not asking for this to happen anytime soon. I don't want to invite this in, like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so,
Yeah.
but again, it's some of my own
Yeah.
resistance, my own fear, my own like, oh, if I talk about it or think about it too much, am I like, does that make sense? So I
No,
want,
it makes perfect sense. That's the fear for a lot of people. It's if I talk about it, it's going to happen. That
right.
simple as that. And it's like, no, no, it's not though. It's not though. And in that chapter, that's what love looks like a lot of times.
Yeah.
I talk about that. Love looks like preparing because I've known far too many people who've died, and even outside of this work, just family and friends who've died. Like my grandmother, even was the glue of this
Hmm.
family, and she died, and we haven't been able to
Yeah.
together since 2011. And it's like we could have prepared better for this, but no one wanted to talk about it. And
Right.
even still, no one wants to talk about it, and everyone's walking around with these pieces of grief that if we all came together, we'd be able to get out. But also, kids, you know, I had a friend whose mom, my friend's at work one day, she gets a call that her mom literally just dropped dead. Healthy woman, seemingly.
Mm,
And so there were no goodbyes. There was no planning. There was no talking about it. So now you're stuck trying to, you can't even mourn right away. You have to first plan a funeral. You
mhm.
have to first call, her job. You have to call the family. You have to call these people. And maybe 3 days later, you can start the mourning process.
Yeah.
And so had you been brave enough to talk about that much earlier, then the morning can start right away. The community can start right away. My friend who I talk about in the book, there's a chapter about Delphine,
Yeah.
um, and loved her so much. And when she was diagnosed, it was so quick, and And her daughter Michelle, who's a great friend of mine, like they had those conversations and they planned, and she welcomed people in to join her in that. And so we created, a meal train. We were sending gift certificates for Michelle to make sure she ate when
Mm,
so she could spend that time with her mom. Um, and so when her mom died, it was like, okay, the funeral is here. The funeral's going to be this and this and this. So she could spend that time loving in community, and the family could find ways to stay together instead of falling apart.
yeah.
Yeah, we have to do it. We have to talk about that. We have to plan as much
Yeah.
as we possibly can.
Yeah. It's gosh, it's so important and it's so one of the things I mean, I do a lot of my work, Darnell, I'm speaking in the corporate world. So I'm speaking at, events and meetings and offsites and conferences. And there's two things that I've noticed when I share stories about grief. I'll
Mhm.
talk about my parents or my sister in the context of what I'm talking about. I'm not there specifically to talk about grief, but I do notice how much unresolved grief so many people have because I can imagine, I mean, I can only imagine how much this happens with you, but if I share a little bit about it or when I've written about it, so many people come up and tell me their grief stories, which I'm always incredibly honored by.
Absolutely.
But I also noticed that when I was grieving, actively grieving right after some of these significant losses, and I shared about it, even people that I was only connected to professionally would reach out and talk to me about their faith or about God or about spirituality, or even say things like, I love you or I'm praying for you. And I was, again, really touched by it, but sort of struck by that's not the normal business conversation that we're
Mhm.
having.
Yeah.
So I do feel like, as charged and as resistant as we are, I think when we step into that space, it does open up so much more.
People, yes, like people want to be witnessed, one, but also there are people there are people waiting for someone to talk about that, to talk about the losses that they've had, to talk about their mom, their sister, their dad, so they can say me too.
Yes.
And even if they don't say me too, and they offer the prayers and they offer this thing, it's sometimes that's what they need as well. Sometimes it's they're offering the thing that they needed, and by offering that, it's like helping them through whatever journey they're going through. But we realize, it's important. A big part of this book is realizing that we aren't alone in any of this, and the more we talk about it, the more we realize that, like so many times, people retreat. And I even talk about, the strong one,
Yeah.
whenever someone dies, I had to be there for the family. I had to be the strong one. And by doing that, they isolate themselves. And so when people come with these words and they come with, the affirmations and the love, it feels kind of strange and they kind of and they feel they have to reject it because it's like, if I receive it, it might break me
Right.
and can't be in this role anymore as the strong one for whoever. And it's like, you don't have to be. You
Right.
can, and I tell people all the time, you can all fall apart together.
Yeah.
Like and there's no one who needs to steer the ship right now.
Yeah.
And if the funeral doesn't happen for another 2 months, then let it be,
Right.
whatever that is. If you can't do it right now, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, yeah, I definitely resonated with that when you were talking about the strong one. And there was, you know, a whole chapter that you talked about this, but you referenced it throughout, your experience, obviously, as a black man
Mhm.
and in the African American community. I just would love for you to talk a little bit about, because I learn some things. And I mean, when we were emailing before we did this, I think I shared with you, I grew up in Oakland. Obviously I'm a white guy, but I grew up and around and in relationship with a lot of my friends and teammates being black and noticing and listening to conversations and words that were used and some cultural differences around death and dying.
Yeah.
But I learned some really important things in reading your book, so thank you for sharing that. But I'd love for you to speak a little bit about some of the complexity and challenge for Black
Mhm.
people talking about and dealing with death.
Oh no, absolutely. I talk often about how the grief is different for Black folks, and a lot of that is because we are constantly in grief. Like there's a constant grief that we have dealt with and this underlying current of it. And so that's the foundation where it's very communal. So when, our mother dies, our grandmother dies, our friend dies, we're grieving that, but we're also grieving uh the many losses we lost in the system, how
Yeah.
we're treated in the system. When George Floyd died, it was like how everyone we all came together, but it was like, sure, this was someone we didn't know, but that was also our cousin, that was our uncle, that was our brother. And so there's this communal grief that we hold. Um, and then there's the part where there's the celebration of life. Like one, we a lot of times we don't talk about death. We avoid it. But when it happens, because grief has been constant, because there's been so much struggle, then we have to celebrate, one, this homegoing, but also the life that this person led,
Yeah.
and find those glimmers that were in that life to pull out and say, this is worth celebrating.
Yeah.
They made it through, they survived. And it's tough a lot of times. Like everything we're dealing with now, it's kind of like, no, this is nothing new for us.
Yeah.
This is nothing new for Black folks. We're still, this is exactly what we've been waiting for everyone else to see. And that's grief in that, right? There's grief in that. And so while we were dealing with what now everyone else is facing, we were also losing people very
Yeah.
close to us,
Yeah.
on top of all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And so it does, and so I think, I had a friend once who said, for Black people in America, we've never been without at least stress.
Mm.
Um, and so, it's everything is just so compounded. It's just all right there.
Yeah.
And which is again why we have to know that we aren't alone. And there was once a time when we didn't really share too much with each other, because everyone had a burden to carry, and we didn't want to add to their load. But now we're having conversations like this. This is a great conversation to have,
Right.
and say, hey, there are resources I can provide you. I know you're carrying things that are heavy. There are ways to put that down.
Yeah.
Uh, and so let's just talk about it. And so if we can get people talking about that and get Black folks talking about that, and realize like, hey, there are therapists out there. We're talking about therapy at brunch,
Right.
and it's great. And we're talking about, oh, well, I at least, 5 times a month, it's like, do you know a good grief counselor? I'm ready to talk to someone. And
That's
it's like,
big.
yes, yes, and um because we realize that in that community, like we need those things in community.
Yeah.
And so it is complex, and it's never ending. I don't think there's an end to Black grief.
Yeah.
But so we have to find ways to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, and as I was reading, I mean, appreciating what you were sharing about it, and then again, just my own experience and hearing from people in my life who've shared different experiences with me of being Black, I was thinking to myself, wow, there's not a lot of death doulas out in the world in general, but I got to imagine there's not a lot of Black men like you who are doing this work. And that probably poses some of its own challenges for you personally and within, your family and community. Like how is your work received both with people close to you, but just sort of in general, being
Yeah.
who you are and, you know, walking
Yeah,
through the world the way you are.
it's a strange thing. It's funny. I'd never thought about it until, maybe a year ago, and I was on a call, on a training call, and it was maybe 50 of us on there, and one of the women stopped the training, like they were talking about something. She stopped. She says, "Can we stop for a second? I just want to, commend Darnell for being the only man here." And I look around, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, yes, I am.
Yeah.
Never, like it never crossed my mind, and I think because I grew, it's never been, different for me. It's
Right.
it's it's always been this since I was a kid. And so I'm not doing any, like, even when I got certified as a death doula, there's nothing I've done different, from what I was doing before I even heard the term death
Right.
doula. And so it's just always been, oh, this is what we do. And so it hasn't been in my family. I've always been like the strange one in the family, right? Like the black sheep. I'm the one who left home and whatever. So I think anything that I do, they're just like, oh, that's Darnell. But it's been so positive. It's been so
Yeah.
amazing that to see like my friends now have to think like we're at this age where we have to think about death. And
Right.
I don't, I lost my first friend at 13. I remember being a kid and my grandmother was losing her friends. Her friends were dying. And it made sense to me. That was what was supposed to happen. You're at that age, grandmothers, grandfathers, they died, then your parents, then you. Um, but I think I probably lost more friends than my parents have. And so even as a kid, I was there like, oh, we're going to lose people. But now I have friends who are like, yes, I'm ready to talk about this.
Mm.
I lost someone last week, uh, and sometimes it's jokingly, but they'll say, would you do my eulogy at the funeral? I'm like, yes, I will do it. I will do it. But they're so ready to have these conversations because now they see how how much grief has impacted their life,
Yeah.
how much loss has impacted their life. I think last year was so hard. I know so many people died.
Mm.
So many people were diagnosed with um, something terminal, and and so we have to face it. And even on the other side, so many people are realizing now that they haven't lived the life that they wanted to live,
Yeah.
and but they think that they still have time to do it, and hopefully they do. And so they're asking me like, well, what can I do to one plan, but also to face my mortality and say, I can make a change here.
Yeah.
I can live this better life. And so it's been a very positive thing. Nothing too wild, nothing too negative, which I really appreciate. And my family, they're all on board. They still don't want to talk. Most of them still don't want to talk about it, which is fine. But like I don't even know if they signed up for the book tour. I'm like, you all get tickets. They'll be there, but we'll see. But it's been positive, and I'm loving it all.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like, I mean, you talk about this in the book, but it seems like traveling, whether it's to Asia or out here to California to Esalen or other places, like that's been important in your life. And what have you learned both from traveling in general and then as you do your work as a death doula in other parts of the country or the world when you kind of look at this from different cultural lens?
Yeah, it's what I've learned is that overall, like I said earlier, it's the thing we all have in common is that we all want to be seen. There's a thing that people say, oh, I don't want to be forgotten, and that's important. We all want to be witnessed, that we all want someone to be there to say you were here. And we want someone to remember that. And so it's been important for me to travel and talk to people and get their stories and get their and capture these pieces of their lives that they think may not last when they leave. I'm able to tell them they do, and I'm able to help them write these stories. And everyone wants to do that. I go to Esalen, and I'm usually there for a workshop about writing and unlocking your full potential as a writer and unblocking yourself. But I'm so grateful that I get there and I'm able to provide the space. Like the last time I was there, I went for a workshop on the importance of storytelling and how to tell your own story.
Hmm.
And not it had nothing to do with grief, but when we got there and we were going around our opening circle, there were so many people there dealing with some sort of grief. And then I went to the bookstore and I'm talking to folks in the bookstore and they're like, yeah, it's strange. There's something heavy here this week. And I
Mm.
said, well, maybe I could do a workshop on grief. And it was, everyone came and it was just this incredible thing. And everyone got to sit with each other and share these stories and share why they're grieving and what's happened and how they want to move forward, how they've been able to, and so how some people have been able to move forward and heal from these things. Um, and so but yeah, it all comes down to wanting to be witnessed and this legacy that we all hope to leave, and whether even if it's just through our children.
Yeah.
There's the Tracy Chapman line in the songs like if I'm not making history, making babies was the best I can do. It's like, yeah, make babies. Yeah, pass it down, pass it
Yeah.
down. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, we all just want to leave something here that says we were here.
Yeah. Well, and my wife and I were at a dinner party a few weeks ago, and someone was sharing about the sudden loss of his brother-in-law and how
Mhm.
painful it was. And we were debriefing a little bit after, and this man who shared, who we know not that well, but we know he doesn't actually have kids. And then my wife Michelle and I were talking about, I do think having children with all of its excitement and challenge and all the things that go with it, I do think it forces us to some degree to think about our mortality in a certain way, because it's like, well, I'm somebody's dad or mom, and I'd
Yeah,
like to be here to see them grow up, but I also don't want them to lose their parent. And I do feel like when I think about death myself or my own death, the fears that I have of it, happening, we've got an almost 20-year-old and a 17-year-old. That's often where I go to right away, is that I want to be here as long as I can for myself and to live my own life, but also for my girls,
yeah,
and I thought a lot as I was reading your book too about, and I was at a funeral just a few weeks ago and thinking about, oh gosh, what are my girls going to say, or how will they feel, or what will they think? I mean, I think it's hard not to kind of go those places,
yeah.
but I imagine,
It's
you know,
tough.
yeah,
It's tough, but I think it's okay to go there. It's okay to have those thoughts, and I think those thoughts should drive us to, um, I'm sure you're a great dad, but to be better, we could all be better.
right,
So they should drive us there. They should drive us to have those conversations with our kids. I, my son's probably very tired of talking about it, but it's like I'm like, listen, okay, if this happens to me, remember you get 3 days, but pull the plug, take all the insurance money,
right,
bury me cheap, whatever you
yep,
need to do. But it should drive us to have those conversations and to not be afraid of it and pull them in. I think everyone I know who's it doesn't eradicate the grief that we're going to feel when we lose our parent, but it can make it a little bit lighter.
yeah,
Like I love watching these videos on Instagram of these siblings who get together, or just sometimes it's just an individual, and they say, here's everything we want our mom to know. It's like our mom died 2 months ago, and here's everything we think she'd be happy to catch up on. And they're like, well, your favorite character died on the TV show, and it's like this funny stuff, but it's like, oh, because they had those conversations with their parents.
yeah,
They weren't afraid of him. I had a friend whose mom was dying, and the mom told the three siblings, she said, listen, if there's anything you need to ask me or anything you want to talk about, I have maybe days left. Do please ask any question you have. And only one did, and the other two are like, oh my God, there's this hole that can no longer be filled. Because they were afraid of that. And so
yeah,
we have to be able to talk about that.
yeah. It's you're saying that there's a movie that came out. I want to say I was in college, so it would have been the early '90s. It's called My Life, and Michael Keaton is married to Nicole Kidman, and he's kind of this jerk of a, I think, high-powered corporate guy, like doesn't really care too much, but he finds out that he's going to die. He gets a turn, and they have, I think she's either pregnant or they have a young, baby boy. And he goes on and just starts making, and this is, way back. He's like, has to set up an old school camera with VHS, but he starts making these videos where he's talking to his son. And I just remember sobbing and sobbing and sobbing through the movie, because it's this guy coming to terms with his mortality and kind of realizing, oh, I've been a jerk. I should probably be a better person. But also, here's all the things I want to tell my son, who's not really going to get to know me because I'm going to be gone before. And even back then, and I was really young, but I thought to myself, like, to your point, like, could we think about our death on a more regular basis, and how would that change the way we live?
I think we have to, and and even to that point, it's a little loud. Hold on.
It's
I
all
believe.
good.
But to that point, yes, like we have to. And so when like I'm someone who has to face his mortality every day because
Right.
in 2004 I was diagnosed with the blood clotting disorder, right?
Yeah.
And at any moment I could die. And so, but at the same time that I was diagnosed with that, my son's mom was pregnant with him. And literally the day I was able to walk again was the day he was born.
Wow.
And so going through life and having these appointments and having this condition, and every year I go and see my hematologist. And at that point, I was going to see them every week. Um, they were just surprised that I was still here, And so there was a point where I said, I just hope that I'm able to be alive long enough that he's able to know who I am,
Yes.
and then if I can get to that point, then I've made it.
Yeah.
And, then he turned 18, and I remember, giving that speech at his 18th birthday. I was like, I'm just glad that we got here. So now anything beyond this is kind of just borrowed time, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
But
Well,
but having that let me see that.
yeah, and how, I mean, with that, I was struck by you sharing that um in such a poignant way. Like, how do you live with that and not have it freak you out that you're, walking around sort of paranoid or worried that it could happen? I mean, it seems like from what you write about and just getting to know you here in this conversation, like you're someone who really dives into life. So,
Yeah.
you know,
No, it's for me, I think it I see the benefit, like it's benefited me greatly. I think thankfully before all that, because of again my childhood growing up with my grandmother, death was never something that I was afraid of.
hmm,
So when the diagnosis came, it was like, oh, okay. And when it came, they literally said, oh, you should have been dead a month ago.
right.
Uh, we have no idea why you're still here. And so that felt like this blessing to me. But then it was like, oh, well, then I need to make because of this, I need to make life as exciting as possible. I've done that. I every day I choose to make life as and every day is not amazing. There are some hard days, there are some boring days, there's this, but I get to choose that. I get to choose what it is. And so it's never been scary for me because we're all going to get to that place. We're all going to die. It would be incredibly inconvenient right now for me to die, but it wouldn't be so awful.
Yeah.
And I think in the last now what 22 years, nearly it'd be 22 years this year. Um, I've lived the life of 20 people, and
Yeah.
so when I go see my hematologist now, they're just like, "Oh, okay, you went cliff diving off, and occurs. I'm glad you're still here.
Right.
I'm flying all the time. They're like, okay, do you get up and walk on the plane at least and make sure that your legs are stretched? I'm like, yeah, we're good, we're still here. Um, but and I also, I get to be that thing where people say like, "Oh, you are really living." I'm like, "Yeah, because I could die at any moment." And then we
Yeah.
get to have those conversations, and they realize like, "Oh, well, what am I doing?" Like, and I tell people like, we'd all be blessed to be diagnosed with some end of life thing, something that could kill us at any moment. Uh,
Yeah.
and hopefully it will push us into some direction. Like in the book, I talk about, having the client who thought that she could die in surgery,
Right.
and um, thankfully, she didn't, but she had changed her life so much at the thought of I could
Right.
die. And it was like, oh, I should be living that life that I want. And started it. But then once the surgery was over and everything was back to, normal, quote
Right.
unquote, um, then she relapsed back into that life. And it was like, no, you have to keep that up because
Yes.
you could still easily die today.
Well, and I'm curious, how do you, because it seems to me like my experience when I've been close to people who died, like when my mom was dying, I remember spending the night in my childhood home, and my mom had stage 4 lung cancer, and it got pretty gnarly towards the end, and I went for a run in the neighborhood that I grew up in, where I used to ride my big wheel and my bike, and I was having this thought and just wondering to myself, and I wasn't having a lot of conversations with my mom. She didn't really want to talk too much about her experience. But I remember thinking, I wonder what it's like for her knowing like it's coming soon. What's it like to know that she's going to die? And Darnell, as I'm running, literally stopped, physically stopped, and I went, wait, holy shit. I know I'm going to die. I just don't live like it. I'm not conscious of it. And I say that because I do think sometimes, like around, you talk about this in the book, that like time sort of slows down or almost stops. You get into that. And coming out of it, there's this sense that I often have of like, I'm going to remember this. I'm going to live differently. And I
Mhm.
do, but I also forget. And then like someone cuts me off on the
Yep.
freeway and I get pissed, or the email doesn't come in and I'm annoyed, or I'm stressed out about something stupid. And I'm just wondering, like, it,
Yeah.
how do we keep that conscious awareness more,
It's it,
you
yeah,
know?
that's the hard part. That's the hard part, right? And it's the it's sometimes you just have to remind yourself. You have to, and that again, it doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be this thing that you're constantly. I don't think about every day that hey, I could die at any moment. Like it,
Right.
sometimes a week might pass, and it's like, oh, yes, this is a thing.
Yeah.
Um, but when the thought comes, honor that thought when it comes, and say, oh, and sometimes it's not. I need to. Okay, well, I should quit my job. I hate being there, or
Right.
whatever that is. Sometimes it's just I should go get that ice cream. I want ice cream. I'm gonna get that ice cream. I saw a couple at Home Depot not long ago, and they were walking through, and he's like, "Oh, look at this washing machine. I really like this." And she's like, "That's not the one we're getting. I told you that's not the one." And I was like, "He should get that. He should get that washing machine." I was
Right.
like, "If it was me, we would just have two washing machines in the house." You know. So,
Right.
and sometimes it's that, but but just honor it when the moment comes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when it's not there, it's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's really important. I mean, and you talk also in the book about the importance of self-care in general for all
Mhm.
of us. And like, what are some things that you do to take care of yourself generally, but also when you're doing this deep, intense, emotionally heavy work?
I for me, for self-care, I am huge on food. I love food, man. I'm eating my way through Mexico this week. Um, which also travel. I love traveling. But I just have to be around people who make me feel good, and people who I can feed and can talk to and aren't afraid of these emotions also. And they may not even come up, but it's like I want to be around people who, if they did come up, we could hold each other.
Yeah.
Um, that's important. Being in community. There are times when it gets so heavy that sometimes I just want to go home and be with my family. So I'll book a ticket to my hometown, and no one knows why I'm there. It's not that's not important to me. It's just to be around something very familiar.
Yeah.
And I might even just get a hotel room, but I'll go by my dad's place. I'll go by my mom's. I'll go to my sister's house. I'll go see, family and friends that I went to high school with. Just to be around something familiar for a while.
Yeah. That
And
makes
I
sense.
journal. I'm huge on journaling, and I love that you talk about writing. And that so much comes up in that. It's so much. Um, we unblock so much. Like the more you write, you get these thoughts out, these other thoughts that come up from years ago that have been blocking you creatively or whatever that is. So yeah,
Yeah.
all of it. Mhm.
Yeah, well, and there were a couple other things that really struck me too. I love the chapter where you talk about speaking ill of the dead.
Oh yes.
And, I have this friend, and she and I both have lost both of our parents, and she had a really difficult relationship with her father. And when her dad died, she said she would, people would find, oh, I'm so sorry, my condolences. And she would say, oh, don't worry, he was an asshole. And people didn't like know how to react to that because it was like, what? You're not supposed to say that, right? But she's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
he was an asshole to me, and I didn't have a good relationship with him. Just
Yeah,
because he died doesn't mean that I'm going to go tell everybody. Oh, because, and
yeah, yeah.
I think sometimes we're grieving the loss of our parent or this significant person, but sometimes we're also grieving the loss of the relationship that we didn't have.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't feel like we make a lot of space for that. And when in that
Hmm.
chapter you're talking about it, I just felt so much more permission. And even
Hmm.
sometimes when someone's been sick for a long time, like when my sister died, I was heartbroken, but I was also grateful because she'd been suffering for
Yeah,
many years.
yeah.
So there's all these complicated feelings, but it feels like we're supposed to just be sad. We're
Like
supposed
there's
to
this
talk.
one feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're supposed to be sad and you're supposed to talk positively about them, and everything else is like out of
Yeah.
bounds.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and that's why so many people feel guilty for being happy in grief,
Right.
for laughing that first time. It's like, oh, I shouldn't go on that vacation and have fun. No, go and do that thing. If they were an asshole, talk about it. I had one of my close friends. I've been talking about him this week actually, but he died back in 2009. And he was an asshole. And part of the story that I share, and so when I tell these stories about him, he was an incredible person, but also an asshole.
Hmm.
And that makes up the whole person. I remember, we have to make room for that.
Yeah.
Um, I remember when Maya Angelou died, and
Mm.
people were, uh, Maya Angelou is Maya Angelou, right?
Right.
But people were sharing like, oh, and when she was a sex worker, and people were like, don't say that. And it's like she talked about it. It's fine.
Right. Right.
Like tell the whole story. This is
Right.
why we get these awful biopics on TV and in these movies because people are afraid to tell the whole story, and
Right.
then we're confused. Like, well, what was the rest of their life?
Yeah.
And it's fine, and we have to make space for it. And I think we start doing that by being honest, like your friend, being honest about it. Like, oh yeah, no, he was an asshole. No, it's fine.
Right.
You don't have to give me your condolences. I
Right.
didn't do much, but he's dead.
Yes.
There's the one book. Oh, what's it? I can't remember her name, but it's like I'm glad my mom is dead or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But the title catches people off guard, and they're like, "Huh,
Yeah.
okay." And so saving room for the complicated things and just asking questions. If you don't, it's like, oh, he was an asshole. Well, okay. And then I'm a nosy person. I'm gonna ask further questions about
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think just, I mean, what I love too in reading your book, it sounds like you are very curious in asking people questions about death, but just about life in general. Um, and I do think so much of what you talk about, Darnell, in the book is so often sort of out of bounds, right? We don't talk about these things. We don't ask about these things. They are personal and vulnerable, but I think just, you know, so important. And you referenced a couple different times about sort of psychedelic experiences or
Oh yeah,
mushrooms, which I was
absolutely.
fascinated by because my own experience with that as well, I find that there is a lot of communication that I get from people who
Hmm.
have passed
Hmm.
when I'm in that state. Um, and I often say, I mean, they usually don't come back and say mean things, or they're not like you should be more sad. It's almost
Yeah.
always right that point of like
Yeah.
they want us to be happy and they want to express their love to us. But I'm
Oh,
curious
absolutely.
what you've experienced with that in terms of, and I know this gets
Yeah.
into another realm of like sort of talking to
Oh
people on
no.
the other side, but I think it's a really important
I think it's
aspect.
important. I love talking about it, and I'm never sure. You're never sure when to have these conversations. But no, absolutely, yeah. And even more recently, I had a mushroom journey, and my intention was so, and I just had a I just had a fraternity brother who died. We were close in college, and you know, great guy. And he died. He was young, early 40s. He was married with kids.
Mm,
And because I've had these experiences, and literally every time any plant medicine, it's always spirits who come and I get to have these communications. And so part of my intention was, if there's anything he needed to share with me or wanted me to share with anyone, let me know.
hmm.
Come communicate that with me. And not to get into this long story, but my great grandfather, who I'd never met, came to me And he's like, come with me. I want to show you my life. And
Mm,
so I go with him to this house in Detroit, Michigan, where his wife lived, but not with him. He never lived in Detroit. She lived there with the husband that I knew,
hmm
you know. And so I'm there and I'm watching him show me this life. And I say, and at the end of it, I say, you never got to live this life. Like I watch him and my grandmother like live this entire life out
hmm
in love. And I say, you never got to live this life. Why are you showing me this? How are you showing me this? And he's like, no, I didn't get to live it. He was like, but because she was able to move on in love, I was able to live in that love that she had with him. And he's like, so as someone who's passed on, we hope that the people we love can move forward and continue to love and continue to give themselves however they can, because in that love we can live. And then my fraternity brother, he shows up and he says, yes, but there is no life I got to, there's no full life that I got to live with my wife either. And said I wanted that. And he's
hmm
like, you can still have it. She just has to continue to love.
mm.
It's like this moment where I'm like, oh, it's
That's a lot,
it's a lot, and it's like, well, what is my responsibility here, And it's like,
right?
I can't call this man's wife and tell her I did mushrooms and
Right?
or can I, and so it's that, and each time, like in the book, I talk about how there was the line of black men who came and just said that they never
Right.
got to grieve themselves, um, and it's so real, and so I find ways. So I take all that and put it into my work. And so now when I talk to people, I say, listen, you don't have to be the strong person here,
Right.
especially if you're dying, because there are people who are on their deathbed still holding up this thing to keep the family together. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
you don't have to be that. And
Yeah.
you shouldn't be that. Let go.
Yeah.
Let go. And so I get to bring that into this work.
It's so powerful, Darnell. I mean, I think so much of what you're doing is so important. And again, it's bringing these universal truths that are emotional, that can be taboo, but bringing it into like it's okay for us to talk about this, And I think as we start to wrap this conversation up, I remember years ago hearing Ariana Huffington speak at a conference, and she said this thing, and it probably wasn't, something that she came up with, but she referenced this idea of living your eulogy and not your resume. And I remember writing an article about that after and just thinking about that. And often, while I don't always talk about it directly myself, this idea of like, how do we live our lives? Again, as you and I've been talking about, a little more aware of our own deaths. How do we live in a way that, so much of your work, you talk about one of the chapters is about being a life doula and conversations about death or even facing death, even if it's at the very end, it's really about how we live. And so, what are you hoping people take away from this book? And what do you feel like at this moment in your own life, in your own evolution, what are you wanting to share with the world as you're putting this great book out into the world today?
Yeah, I that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I want people to one see that if they're reading it or listening to it, they still have time
hmm
to have that life that they thought about, to have that life they want, to work toward it. Like you said, live your eulogy, not your resume. Um, there's that great story of who was Alfred Nobel, who created like the TNT, and then they accidentally published his obituary. And
hmm
he sees it, and he's like the father of death, and he's like, I don't want that. And now we have the Nobel Peace Prize because he's like, oh, I can change that.
Yes.
So again, if you're reminded of your death, you can live a better life. Like that's a perfect example. So I want people to see that. And I want people to know that they've done this work on some level. I want people to read it and say, "Oh, maybe I wasn't there at the end of someone's life, but I was there I held a friend's hand when they lost their job. I helped a friend through a breakup, whatever that is, and to see how they've done it. Because so often I hear people say, I don't know how you do this. I could never do this. And I'm like, you've already done it on some level. And for me, I want to continue to I always want to be able to face that mortality and then reach the end of my life and I don't worry about figuring it out now. I think, or, capturing some moments. I'm like, it'll all come back at some point. Like doing plant medicine, you do mushrooms, and while you're out there, you get this feeling of, how am I going to remember this? How am I going to implement all of this entire download in life? And none of it makes sense until the next day when you're integrating back and you're like, oh, that's it. And I think I feel like that's what the end of life is going to feel like.
Yeah.
And so I've allowed myself to not need to figure it out now.
Hmm.
Uh, it doesn't have to make sense now. And to just continue. I love living. I love this. But when it comes to the end, I want people to just say, yeah, he did it.
Yeah.
He did it. He had a good life.
Hmm. Well, listen, the book is amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for the work you're doing. It has had a profound impact on me.
Thank you so much.
And I'm excited that people get to not only hear this conversation that you and I are having, but pick up a copy of the book and read it and share it with others because I think it's going to have a real impact on so many people. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh man, I appreciate that so much. Thank you for your words. And I mean, it really means everything to me to, you pour so much of yourself out there. And it's like, now the scary part is, how was this received? So I
Yeah,
appreciate that so much. Thank you.
absolutely. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.